everybody. Today's Tough Topics in LD is taken from a web chat. That's a daily web chat that's hosted by Jack Chew. Special thanks to Jack for sharing that with us. If you do want to pick up Jack's daily web chat series, it's at lunchtimes. It's called Chewing It Over. And if you search Jack Chew, you'll find his Twitter account, and he posts on every single social media site going. So I just wanted to show there is some relevance in there because we're talking about our reflections for 2020 and what we hope for moving forward in 2021. It is heavily physio focused, but I think there's a lot of relevance in there to all of us as wider healthcare professionals, and I'm all about trying to share opportunities for us to look outside of our bubbles. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks again, Jack, and we'll see you guys soon. Cheers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me and hope everything's all right. As I've promised, in the new year, I will stop incessantly being paranoid about whether or not the tech is working. What are we, like 75 episodes now in which it's most of the time been working. So hopefully I can stop being all needy with you in the new year. So our last episode of the year, and as it says in the bottom there, it says 12:30 till 1. I am not confident that we'll finish at 1 o'clock today because I've got some brilliant guests that I want their thoughts and feelings and reflections on the year. And so I definitely want to get stuck into that. And if that goes over time, that goes over time. We're just going to indulge it for Christmas. Thank you so much to all of you that have joined me, not just on this show, but across all the other work that we do. It's been a fascinating year and one of massive challenge. And so there's various different support networks that have emerged. And certainly for me, the opportunity to broadcast in this novel way, but also another opportunity for me to promote some of the brilliant people that are in my network who are doing great work to raise standards, not just in the MSK industry, but in education, in healthcare in general, for the betterment of society. It's just an exciting opportunity for me. And it's another way in which, I chanced it and did some pilot episodes and it's come good. The fact that people have are listening in live and engaging as they are doing, but then also people listening in their commutes and getting back to me about how they feel and what recommending topics, submitting questions. And then obviously we put that out as an audio podcast so that we're trying to improve accessibility. People in other nations, in other time zones, then being able to get hold of it so they're not feeling obliged to join us at lunchtime in the UK. It's just been a fascinating exercise for us, and certain surprises for me as well. It's just how people have been receiving it. Not always perfectly agreement, of course. It's been a good point of debate, really, in many ways. But just the fact that people are engaging in this stuff because obviously I think it matters, and you guys do too. So that's been really brilliant. And I think what's good about today's show is I've got some of my favorite folk whose takes on the world and takes on these things are really important to me, and some people as well in the mixer. Well, I'd say actually, I look at them there in the lobby. They're all people that when I look on at their headshots there in the lobby, they're probably making a mess up. They're eating the snacks. I don't know if the toilet's working out in the lobby, so yeah, don't make too much of a mess, guys. But these are people whose views are so important to what I'm doing because they really are, and especially some of them who I've met this year, they've really helped to influence and sort of colour the world in which we're in right now, and for the better. These are people that have taken opportunities and are trying to promote messages at a time where the need is high, at a time where people would otherwise skulk away and hide, and understandably so, for no fault of their own. People needed to double down and sort of protect. Whereas actually these are people that have shared and innovated, and to do so is such an exciting thing that this terrible year has presented with it many opportunities, and these are the people that have taken us up on it. Before I do bring them in, I just want to take a few minutes to sort of reflect on key moments as I see it. I promised I would, and so I made a few scribbles. The first thing is, of course, that the world has been affected, and so MSK and all the various things that I'm talking about on a more regular basis have been coloured by the coronavirus pandemic. And so without getting into too much of it, where it sort of feels a hell of a long time ago, and is a long time ago since I first was one of the idiots that felt like they were sounding an early alarm and coming across as a bit of a clown in February saying this is going to change the world, I promise. Homeschool your kids if you can, and getting the hate mail that came from that. Oh, easy for you to say with babies at home, it's you're being a drama queen. And so then we entered into something that I think now it was fair to say I probably underestimated it, never mind over. Now, it's also then gone the full way in which I was someone that I feel like, especially when we didn't understand this and we thought it might be second coming of Ebola in the Western world, and that this was going to kill 3% of the population, it was going to disrupt us in immeasurable ways. We're all going to know and lose loved ones very directly. That was something that was pretty terrifying, and also I understand the infrastructure and the circumstances and the politics that came downstream of that. Unfortunately, I've then also on this show and elsewhere been critical of the incoherence of not just the politics, but also the underneath that with the civil service and the quangos. I just can't understand the coherence. And the lack of coherence underneath that is something that I feel has been really frustrating and challenging in such a way that there hasn't been an appropriate cost-benefit analysis. And I feel that essentially there is a lack of accountability in the system then, which I think has really directly affected things, including in MSK practice in terms of new ways of working, being things that we haven't been able to take those opportunities because on a governance level, there are a lack of comprehension of graded functional rehabilitation, integration of virtual and in-person tools. Unfortunately, that opportunity has knocked, and that call has not been answered. I'm mixing my metaphors there, aren't I? But yeah, that's a real shame for me. I think that there is evidence in various different ways, including in some of the work I've been doing, especially early in the pandemic. There is no evidence I've seen, unfortunately, that the health quangos and the powers that be and the arm length bodies that wield power in healthcare in the UK and therefore fund healthcare, public healthcare in the UK, truly comprehend rehabilitation, who can deliver it, how we might scale individualized, personalized care in such a way for the betterment of true wellness. And that's been a downside, I would say, to what has happened. And unfortunately, whilst opportunity is not, it sort of worries me that we might not have the infrastructure in place to do that. And therefore, here lies the challenge for reformers in our network to try and make sure we make that case. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that analysis is too pessimistic, but unfortunately I've seen little evidence that these things are going to make sense, and I think that does actually also bleed into the politics of it. Now unfortunately she can't join us today, but Gemma Oliver would be saying, no Jack, everyone's doing their best, chill out. And I love her optimism, and I hope she's right. I really do. I promise you that. The second thing is, of course, and it'd be remiss if I was to reflect on the year and not mention the tragic murder of George Floyd and the way in which that moved the world, and rightly so, and made everyone reflect and challenge themselves in understanding their own biases, and also the way in which that sometimes the analogy being that we might be in the same storm but we're in different ships. And that is something that has been really interesting for people to reflect on, and things that we've touched on Physio Matters, on Chewing It Over and elsewhere. I think one of the things that I do think is I sometimes would relevantly couple those two variables, the pandemic and also then the timing and context of which what happened with George Floyd in that video rightly going viral across the world and bringing most of us to tears. I feel like unfortunately it also has given some organizations and institutions the opportunity to double down on the EDI agenda by that being, because of their analysis of a very complex problem, they've been able to put their blinkers on, parrot certain lines from certain books, from certain people, and give a really narrow analysis of one thing that they've been able to oversimplify in order, not purposely or consciously, but some deflection from the wider macro variables of healthcare in the UK. And that's unfortunate, and we need to make sure we call that out where we see it, and certainly something we'll be doing on this show and beyond, is that when these complex things present themselves, we need to make sure that we're analysing these as thoroughly as they deserve in order to not come to rash and clumsy conclusions just because they might be fashionable. And that's the thing where, unfortunately, I think the context of those two things is very relevant. And so we need to make sure we have better conversations into next year. And as you've heard me rail against in this show, the minute that you see conviction in light of complex topics, you know someone's full of shit. And that might include me. And that's why we always make sure that I'm held accountable by our guests, as well as then the comments that come in and the plenty of hate mail and fan mail that I receive, of course. Now, the final thing as well is that a point of hype and happiness for me is, of course, digital education is something that is the only show in town in many ways at the moment. And so we were well placed to produce content and also create innovations such as, say, Therapy Live or the Rehab Recruits campaign and various different things that were able to move people online, and even Chewing It Over might be an example of that. And so the happiness in my side of things is that essentially you've had this proliferation of content, and what I think will happen if the mechanisms are as they have been over the years is that with quantity will also bring itself quality, and that that you guys as consumers can be appropriately informed and start to then understand how you want to receive information and how you can participate and engage in information to truly democratize the conversation in such a way that we can not just flatten hierarchies for hierarchy's sake, but also notice injustices and unfairness where it exists and really try to fight against it. And I don't just mean that in a sort of shaking my fist class politics or this. I'm just meaning in a basic sense that we all should feel valid and have rights to do that. And the people that we represent and people that we're trying to support, especially in healthcare, that sometimes can't even speak for themselves, if we notice those injustices and we feel that we can have a voice and that digital technologies are able to help us bring that forward, then sometimes the ability for us to step up in that is quite exciting. And there's some great examples sitting in the lobby that can put themselves in that, who embody that far better than I can. And I'm delighted to have a megaphone I can hand over to them on certain occasions. So with that said, that's my little reflection. I said 5 minutes. I bet you didn't believe me, but it has been, I promise. Right, so let me hide this frame, and hopefully it floods everyone into here. Who have we got? Where's that? Guest 4. Joe Turner. There she is. Right, lovely. Right. Hi, guys. Wave if you can hear me. Fantastic. Lovely. Okay. So we're better off doing a bit of a round of intros. I haven't got your names up there, so I'll try and work out how to do that. But especially off the last part I've just said there, and also I invite you all to bloody say, look, I don't know what you've done. If you've just heard me say that and you want to disagree with all of it, now's your time. Now's your time. I'm not trying to bandwagon you onto all those opinions, of course, so please do push back if you feel you want to. But Alistair, I wondered if you could just quickly introduce yourself if you don't mind, but I want you to please, if you would, speak to that last point I made about, because I feel like one of the things that kinship between us is that, you know, that fight for injustice and speaking for those that can't speak for themselves is sort of central to some of your work. And I wondered if you could just reflect back on 2020 in that context for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jack. So my name is Alistair Beverley. I am self-styled on social media as the LD Physio because I'm creative. I specialise in working with people with learning disabilities, but I do work in neuro and MSK as well outside of things. I work at a further education college for people with specialist needs that include learning and physical disabilities. So in the same way that you and I could finish our GCSEs or O-levels or whatever and go to college, the place I work offers that educational opportunity to those young people. And I run a department of 10 staff therapists looking to try and mitigate the impact of the physical disabilities that are associated with these people, and minimize the impact that has on their learning, and try and make so that people can be the best that they can be. If you've ever tried to go to work, whatever, with a pain in your neck, or tried to pay attention in a maths lesson at school when you were in pain or tired or whatever, you know how much it impacts. And the people we work with have already got an inherent deficit, for want of a better phrase, in their ability to take on new information. So anything that we can do to mitigate anything else that would impact on that is where we're about. So I think, looking back on 2020 myself, I think I'll start off with, you know, the two biggest points I think that will come out for me. And one is my favorite word in the world that I seem to use quite a lot. It's not because I like the word, but inequality. And I think, just to pick up on what you were talking about, Jack, you know, I work with people who are some of the most marginalized in society, many of whom don't have a voice. Some do have a voice, and hopefully we're trying to gain a platform for that. And the idea of me setting up as this LD Physio was to try and advocate for change from within. I didn't really see that there was a lot of people out there looking at how we could. There's a lot of families and a lot of self-advocates talking about change, but nobody from within professional circles. So I thought, you know, let's look at that. And I think the inequality has been amplified, I think, by the pandemic. So much so, just to give you a couple of stats, you know, people with learning disabilities as a whole demographic are 6 times more likely to die from the coronavirus pandemic than the general population. Men aged 18 to 34 are 30 times more likely to die, to contract and die from COVID-19 than people without learning disabilities. And I think that's a shocking statistic. And I think, yeah, throughout this year, there's been, you know, inaction, I think, from, as you mentioned, about quangos. I think social services have got a large part to play in that as well. You know, there were the social care easements earlier on in the year, which, you know, left a lot of families high and dry in terms of care. And that's been a real challenge. I think for us, we, like a lot of physio clinics, moved onto virtual platforms, and with some trepidation, to be honest, because we were worried about building engagement and continuing that engagement with the people we work with. But it's been really positive on the whole, really, really positive. I think it's given us a greater insight into what goes on behind the scenes. You know, we see people for 1-2 hours a week in our gym, and it's all hunky-dory, come on, crack on. But we don't see the whole person and the whole situation. And so I think for us, it's definitely given us a greater understanding of the whole network that surrounds that individual. And as hoped, you know, it's sort of spurred me on to host this little web chat series called Tough Topics in LD, where we look at one of the ones we're trying to edit at the moment is looking at bridging the gap with a lady called Rachel Wright of Born at the Right Time, about looking at whether there's a narrative that we can harness between the system and families to make it so that they're not so juxtaposed all the time and fighting against each other. I think on a more positive note, I think another key word for me this year will be flexibility. And I think, the people that I work with, I do have great pride in their ability to adapt and think on the fly. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people who work in teams can resonate with. Jack, I think you are the master of thinking on your feet and adapting, and coming up with new ideas such as this. That's been fantastic. And I think along with that pride, I think has come with a knowledge and an understanding that we have to do more. And that there are still physios out there who work in learning disability practice who are not back to face to face, and and that's fine. But a lot of people we work with need that. They need that social side of things. They need somebody to be with them because they won't engage. It's not a one size fits all approach to virtual sessions. And so I think moving towards the end of this year, I've recognised that there's a lot of skill sets and skills that we have within this area of practice that I think mainstream physiotherapy can learn from, around communication, rapport building. And hopefully moving into 2021, we will start to showcase some of those skills and put some things out there that are more relevant to mainstream practice.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to get stuck into some of the 2021 projections and stuff from all of you when we do a bit of a second lap, if that's all right. But thank you for that, Alistair. Really great starting off point, and one that really does get that balance of, yes, opportunity, but also some costs and things that we need to not be complacent of, and not to notice where the new challenges have been unequally distributed across various different communities. So, Jane, I want to bring you in. Thank you for joining us. A returning guest, of course, on Chewing It Over. We last spoke about students and placements and innovations in that direction, and so here we are a few months later, having done some very significant innovations in that space. How's things been in higher education, and how's the placement landscape looking for us?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back. I apologise, but I literally have 5 minutes.
Sure.
But I mean, everything I suppose is carrying on, and I think the biggest thing for me is similar to you, Alistair, really, is the adaptability, flexibility, resilience, really, as well, particularly students being forced to kind of self-isolate repetitively through the year as well. Like, we have some students who've had to self-isolate 3-4 times, because everybody now is getting randomly tested in the NHS, regardless of whether they've got symptoms. So if one student tests positive and then they live in a shared house with another 6 physio students that are all out on placement, then they've all got to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So it's I suppose the resilience the students have shown by carrying on with that, but also the clinicians in practice have been amazing in supporting these students to kind of almost like a blended placement between face-to-face and then a bit of doing some project work and linking in with them at home. They've had some students doing some amazing things outside of a face-to-face clinical environment, and just people rising to the challenge. So I kind of had a little bit of a few placed students left to place in October, and I was let down by someone, and then kind of pulled in a few favors, and Jack and Matt Fox, who's another local physio to us, took some students in a situation and an environment that we'd not had students in before. And well, I'm yet to find out exactly, because I've not spoken to Jack fully about it, but I think the experience has been amazing, and the students have had such a diverse experience that they would never have had before. And yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's just thanking all of those clinicians out there who've risen to the challenge, and the students as well, who've ended up doing placements that they never signed up for. It wasn't on their radar when they came to physio school that they might be going with Naomi McVeigh on a leadership placement, but some of the opportunities that have been awarded to people that have just kind of thought outside the box and been really flexible. It's been fab. And I think, on a positive note as well, things have changed massively for us. But a lot of those things have been really good, and I don't think we'll go back to how we were before. I think we'll continue to give all these different opportunities to students, and we'll continue to do some online learning as well. I think there's a lot of bonuses of being able to engage with people in an online platform rather than always being in a face-to-face classroom or a big lecture theatre where maybe you're just one person in a sea of people, where you don't necessarily get any benefits from that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been an interesting one, and certainly what I'm realizing is that the students themselves have had to be incredibly adaptable and also forgiving of the chaos that occurs, and the parameters that normally places, and including us, would we'd set up parameters and systems that would protect them from said chaos, but unfortunately it's been chaotic by design. And so their understanding, including of recent students has been phenomenal, including, unfortunately, this conversation. So they were and may still join us in this, but some knobhead didn't send them the link until just now. And so that's an example of the chaos they've had to tolerate. Now, funnily enough, it looks like they are now in the lobby. So hopefully I can bring in Megan and Georgia, who have been our students. And so apologies, girls. Hopefully you can hear us. Can you hear me? Georgia, Megan, can you hear me? No?
Doesn't look like they can.
Can you
Hi,
hear us?
girls.
Can you see us? Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you hear us, girls?
We can't hear anything.
Can't hear anything.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Can you?
It's all crackly.
We're really struggling.
You getting, can you hear me? Is that better?
We can't hear a word.
You can't hear anything we're saying. Okay,
Well, we've just been saying how adaptable, and do you know, I keep saying to students, there are concerns about, you know, not getting experiences that they think they'll need in practice because everything's been so different. And I keep saying to them, but the experiences you're having and you know, the learning that you're doing and the thinking on your feet and adapting to situations is phenomenal, and it's going to give you amazing skills that'll be so transferable into the future. You know, I think you're all amazing.
Now. Does that mean they can hear us?
Yeah, we can now. We can now.
Ah, brilliant. Right, girls, I'm just apologise to everyone that it's my fault that I hadn't sent you the link until now. And I said it was an example of just how disorganised, unfortunately, you've seen us be in your placement, but you've been incredibly tolerant and put up with us. How's it been to have such a different style of placement this year?
Yeah, so it's been really good. I think because we live together, it's really helped the situation, to be honest. I would definitely maybe consider that moving forward for other students on this kind of placement if they do live together, because it's been a lot of help with each other and organising. But it's been really interesting to kind of see a different side of physio, and it's definitely an experience that we've had that other people won't have. So obviously times aren't brilliant with COVID and it's not ideal for the face-to-face aspect, but we've learned a lot of skills that are obviously going to be transferable moving forward, especially with the pandemic and stuff. So we've had a really nice time. It's just been a bit chaotic, but it's been really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, editing podcasts and moving large videos from one place to another is such a unique skill for student health, of course. But clinically, you guys have been brilliant. It's been fantastic. And you know those moments and breakthroughs we've had in recent weeks where I've been like celebrating. These girls can think, they're reasoning, they're putting this together, and the ability for us to get patients together, but also use them and leverage them for case studies when things are a bit thinner on the ground in terms of the frequency. And making sure that, you know, we're all more au fait with Dettol than we used to be. So there's lots of practical skills that running a clinic now involves that you guys have been exposed to. Well, thank you to you and to all students really for being so understanding of the circumstances and taking the opportunities when they present themselves, because it would have been easy for, if we were all being held to standards that we used to be, including by students, then that would have been really tough for everyone and no one would have got anything out of it. So I really appreciate what you've done there.
Oh, thank you so much for your help.
Nice one. Well, Jane, I know you need to go, and girls, please, you know, don't. You can hang around if you like, but equally don't feel obliged to. I'm going to now move to the other guests. But Jane, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Nice day.
I'll listen back later. See ya.
Right, girls, speak now. Do you want to stay, or do you want to go?
What time have we got?
We have got another call at, 5 minutes actually. Yeah.
It's all right. You've got to clear off. You've got some work to do with Matt Fox. Yeah, don't compromise your grades at this late hour. All right. Take care. Thanks a lot. See you later.
See you.
Superstars. Right. Then there were 3. Joe, can I come to you next, please? Certainly, now a veteran of the Chewing It Over show, joins me on Wednesdays for Wellbeing Wednesdays, and certainly one of those characters I was mentioning in the intro that have ended up on my radar, and I think we've spoken plenty in recent months and got to know each other a little well. I think I'd love to know your general take on the year, especially with you being a coach as well as a physio, and what your general thoughts are looking backwards.
Yeah, sure. So Alistair picked a couple of words I think I wasn't going to, but I guess if I was going to, a word for me this year is connection, which isn't a huge surprise. And it was something I was very aware of personally and professionally before this year. But I've realized that even as someone who seeks out connection with other human beings, I had been doing it in quite a small world for many years, and hadn't really been forced to analyze that until COVID hit. And I think only now do I realize how dissatisfying that was. And you have, I think on one of your shows this week, Jack, you referred to the slight bizarre nature of Gemma's amazing Facebook group, which we all agree is amazing. But the bizarre thing is that we needed it. And it was almost to me like a dam that had just been opened, and we're all like, whoa, thank God we have a platform to communicate with each other and to ask questions and to do things, crazy things like tell each other when we don't know the answer to stuff and admit that and ask. And it is absolutely bonkers when you look at it for a profession of communicators to have been in that situation. And I completely agree that it is a bit bizarre that it's this Facebook group which has highlighted that. But I think that COVID in its severity gave us permission to do that, because I think it's the first situation where we've all realized that we don't know what we're doing, and that everybody is probably feeling a little uneasy, and therefore it's okay to say that you do too, and to ask for help and admit that some days you've just got no idea. So I think weirdly it almost had to escalate to this level for us to come out of our clinics and our clinic rooms and admit that we needed to talk to each other and seek each other's advice. I won't go into what I would like, because I know you're going to ask us that next, but I think it's cranked open a door a little bit. I think there's a hell of a lot further to go, but for me, I'm really, really pleased that that connection between not just physios but other health professionals has had to occur in this year.
Yeah. It's a really good point, isn't it? I think because it was so novel and so exposing that it meant that people felt comfortable sharing the fact that they were uneasy and needing help, and that then hopefully sets a precedent for them to be more open and honest, and also recognizing that there's more that feel this way, and actually that there's more smoke and mirrors to underneath all of our behaviors than we ever realized. So yeah, I'll definitely want to come back to that. Now, for those of you that it's been interesting, because this show, especially with it being our bumper special final edition, from what I can tell from the numbers, because this goes out on 7 different channels, we're looking at sort of the dizzy heights of higher live figures than usual. But because there's multiple guests on, you lot are much quieter in the chat than usual, even though there's more of you. So let me just force a question down your necks, and I want you to share with me, wherever you're listening to this, in the comments section, as to what your key highlights and lowlights might be for 2020. Just give your take on the matter, as well as then what you want from next year. So it can be in one-word answers, your highlights, reel, however it wants. But please do, if you're listening to this live, then share with us your thoughts and reflections, if you don't mind. It can be as long or as short as you like. But yes, Mike, we've worked together for a while now in various different capacities, and we've had such an interesting year, and projects that we started and planned in the context of no pandemic, and that have had to be versatile and adapt. But how's the year been for you, and what's your general hot take across all sorts of things?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks, everyone. Christmas tends to be quite a reflective time for me, so it's something I do in depth, probably more than some. But this year has been months worth of reflecting to come up with these thoughts. So I think I want to keep it positive. But as most of you know, I work predominantly in private practice across the professions. So I think it'd be remiss and false of us not to just tip our hat and acknowledge that sadly for some in 2020, they've gone out of business. It's been a really tough time and they've struggled. And we hope that some of those can bounce back and come back into the industry into 2021. But for those who've been able to do well out of it, I think the key word, and Jane mentioned it, was opportunity. And it was opportunity to change. I think certainly on a personal level, one of my big learning points and reflections has been that I've always been someone who found working from home quite hard. So even if I was working from home on a day, then I would normally sit in a coffee shop or somewhere. But 2020 certainly allowed me to learn to love being at home a bit more, whether that's weekends, evenings, and or professionally. So that's one of my personal reflections. Professionally, then there's a few I've listed down. So I think first off, my big take home, it's the big positive I've seen from the years, is the power that we've seen with the therapy industry learning to collaborate more than be competitive. It isn't an us or them. It isn't we're better than you, or you're not as good as us, or this hierarchical system that we tend to struggle to try and beat down. We've seen that people embrace that actually, if we just communicate and we work together and we share ideas, whether that's therapist to therapist, whether that's profession to profession, or even, and this is probably one of the big take-homes, the sort of professional associations to professional associations. We've seen so much more collaboration, and when we do chat about 2021, then that's hopefully something I think and hope continues.
You can start us off then, mate, on that, actually. If you can just give us a bit of a projection forward as to how that then evolves into a better 2021, then we'll start from there.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is we've seen that people in 2020 have been brave and inventive in the things they do, whether that's individually with online face-to-face, the online CPD stuff. And we've seen a big swing in the pendulum of change. And that's what we've seen these professional associations do. What I hope 2021 gives us is a bit more equilibrium, a bit of a happy balance, a happy medium somewhere in the middle where people find that little sweet spot that they're happy. And this will be a different sweet spot for different people. But it'll find a place where the old and the new can sort of coexist nicely. There are things that we've done individually and professionally in the past that probably still is the right way to move forward. But then we've seen these inventive ways of trying new things. So I hope to see now is that if and when the cloud of COVID lifts and finally buggers off, we don't slip back into our silos, into our echo chambers, back into our ivory towers, where all the things that we came, we don't want to be that sort of... I've just been watching a program on Netflix about the Saxons, and it was all about these standalone kingdoms united when the Vikings and the Danes came over. But as soon as the war was won, they all slipped back into their little kingdoms, had this infighting and sort of secular sort of battles. And it's made me really think about the therapy world. Let's not all slip back into our little kingdoms when this Viking invader that is COVID has left our shores until the next one comes along. Maybe we'll retreat slightly, but also maybe we'll unify and realize that to grow and to develop both individually and as a collective, then continuing to keep those lines of communications open, continuing to think of innovative and not innovative ways to survive, but innovative ways to just be more consistent in the way we communicate and develop, or the big development in 2021.
Yeah, and I think it's a lovely point, and reiterated in the chat function by a few folk, including David Wilson. Multi-professional collaboration and action, primary care coming together and pushing forward action to implement change quickly. Yeah, there's been many times that we said about systems and many things that I've shaken my fist at over the years that people say it just takes time. We can't move that quickly, but unfortunately, this unprecedented times has meant unprecedented scales and rates of change as well, which has proven that it can be done. Now, can it be done well is the next question, and we need to try and work that out. Communication's coming up and collaboration's coming up on a regular basis in this conversation, as well as across all people's reflections over this week. So, Ali, I want to bring you back in on this and say, because a lot of what your work is about trying to improve communication interprofessionally and trying to raise awareness and standards, but also highlighting that in your sphere, communication is 9/10 of it. It sort of really is a really important way of doing it. So is there opportunities there because of everyone realizing and being humbled by the need to collaborate and communicate better? Is that an opportunity for you and your work to try and cut through that bit more?
I certainly think so. And I think I've seen, particularly on social media in the last sort of 12 months, a bit of a transition from the clinical aspect to, are we dealing with what's your protocol for an ACL rupture back to return to play, for example, to much more from a lot of prominent people on social media. Why don't we spend time listening to the patient? Why don't we spend time understanding the patient? Why don't we focus on building rapport? And if people go back to what, back when I was on the Physio Matters podcast a year and a half ago, I spoke about all those things, and I felt a little bit like it was a bit of a damp squib then, to be honest, because people were still so focused on the individual critical things and not seeing the bigger picture and seeing the person. And as you say, that is what our practice is all about. And this is one of the reasons why I started, to try and speak out a little bit, is because I think there are skill sets that are bread and butter to physios working in learning disabilities that we can we can share that information. And you know, similar to what Mike was saying, my whole premise is about trying to improve education and understanding amongst mainstream healthcare services, starting with physio, but you know, ending wherever. I think I only want to transform healthcare 1.5 million people with no budget in my spare time. So, you know, how hard can it be? But you know, I think my hopes for 2021 are that increase of awareness of putting the person first and seeing the person rather than seeing the clinical condition that is presented in front of you, whether that's stroke, whether that's low back pain, whether that is somebody with complex quadriplegic cerebral palsy. I don't know. But looking at the person, and I think, you know, as I move into 2021 personally, you know, hopefully we're working on launching a website, and you know, Mike's had me on Sports Injury Fix podcast, thankfully this last year. I forgot to mention that as well. And you know, hopefully just try and get a little bit more exposure. And it's not exposure for me, it's exposure so that the next person you see, you can apply the skills that we've talked about to that person, and it will enhance every clinical engagement that you have from here and into the time you retire.
Absolutely. No, that's really a good point. And there's some great comments coming in, including this one from Taufik on LinkedIn, meaning he's just naming, because I asked the audience as to what they feel has come of this year, and there's a good example that he's given about an app that's called Soothe, which is for mental health and using technology for the betterment of mental health care in that instance. But of course, I think all of us have recognised that the appropriate and nexus between technology and clinical practice, the robots and humans interface type thing, working better because we kind of had to. And that's something that we need to try and use to great effect as well. Because I think, you know, the reason why that comment was really interesting is because there are certain areas, be that mental health, be that learning disability, of course, there's incredible overlap between those two variables there. But it's more that sometimes people say, oh, well, that's a niche or something like that, whereas actually there's a phenomenal amount of you know, that's weird blinkers to suggest that shouldn't matter because it's smaller than the whole, but also the learning that can occur from some of the things that we might do and the changes that we might do to try and make care better in that space will be a benefit from all. The tide would rise all ships, really, if we paid more attention to some of those things that otherwise have been considered niche. And speaking of that then, Joe, I want to think about how some of our conversations on and off air really have involved that, really, is to think about things that you might otherwise have allowed to just rumble on, or not to truly interrogate your own sort of thinking and biases and things like that. That's an area where, because of somewhat under duress, we've all needed to soul search, think about what really matters to us, etc. And I know I don't want to ask you for your New Year's resolutions for various reasons, but I do want you to just give your take on what might be in 2021 based on some of that analysis that you've shared with us over the last few months.
No, well, I will respond to the New Year's resolution thing, because as you know, I'm not big on, you know, making a load now and lots of short-term decisions, but just reflecting on what Mike said about us not retreating. You know, COVID is not a gift, let's not be disingenuous, but it has shaken, let's use snow globe, it's Christmas, it's shaken the snow globe up. And everything is all over the place at the moment, and we could just retreat back and wait for it all to settle and go back to our comfortable places. But I totally agree with Mike. I mean, goodness, I've been waiting for some things to change for 20 years. You know, I remember studying pain mechanisms in the late 90s, thinking, yes, this structural model thing, it doesn't make sense, we're going to change. And we're still having those conversations, and other things haven't changed. We're still so desperate to be right that dictates the style with which we communicate with each other. That has started to change. So for goodness sake, let's keep these balls rolling. And when we are communicating with each other, yes, it's nice to be right, but let's be a bit braver, let's be a bit more curious, let's be kind. There's nothing wrong with that. And you know, exactly as Alistair says, there are so many little pockets of genius within physio. No wonder we struggle with identity, because our identity is actually made up of some magnificent things in all these little pockets that we haven't shared enough. There's an awful lot of carryover, but there's also things, you know, I don't understand some of the brilliant things that Alistair does, and I would love to know, and I can totally see how that would feed into MSK, not least that ability to listen to your patient more. But let's listen to each other more as well. Yeah. And to start with, I would say it's tempting to rush headlong into 2021, and none of us are disagreeing here. I think we all know the direction of travel we'd like things to go in, but I think over Christmas, New Year, let's just stop and breathe, and not just within healthcare, but in the world. I think the reason you go back into silos is because that's a quick, snappy decision, and it's what you know. I would be so disappointed if things in the world and in healthcare didn't change just because we're so desperate to keep running. I think we just need to stop and go, what was that? What just happened to us? What was good? What was bad? What do we want to change? And how do we actually make sure that happens?
Yeah, there was a lovely lady called Noctula who came on the podcast when we were doing these emergency episodes at the start of the pandemic, really, and they'd set up this quarantine program trying to get people moving and things and giving them some access. And she mentioned that the fact that there was a point in which she felt that there was this social media was proliferating with what she called productivity porn. Essentially, people then suggesting, I'm getting after it, why aren't you? And putting pressure on people and guilting them into thinking that they needed to be incredibly productive. And she was just saying, well, no, there's appropriate reason for this to be a time of chaos for us to make sure we take a moment to not burn ourselves out. And what you're describing there is something that is a risk. If people think, all right, I'm going to, the day job might be quieter for a couple of weeks, so I'm just going to sort of strategize, be that home or for work, is actually something that we don't want people to overindulge in that way. It can be a useful time for reflection, and do that if you wish, but generally speaking, don't allow yourself that pressure on your shoulders, because it needs to be a time for you, if ever there is one. And so I think that's a really, really lovely point, and being agreed for as well in the comments. Gemma's mentioned an agreement with Alistair. She says that it's a shame it's taken for a global pandemic for us to realize to focus on people rather than conditions, or rather than narrow focus of academic interests, and that's absolutely right. David Wilson, thanks for your comments, David. It's been interesting to see today. He said that I think that's right, working remotely, not seeing the problem. As clinicians, we hear the patient better, we understand the problem and impact. He said he thinks his spidey sensors are better for doing so, which I think is interesting, how these things influence us in terms of our instincts. And I think that that's a really useful one, is it's made us all naturally reflect a bit more carefully because we've had to heighten our senses. And I think that's a really lovely point. So on that then, I just want to finally throw it out to each of you, but in whatever order of which you wish, as to what you feel we might do, especially for this conversation. You've all been part of it, and I don't just mean chewing it over here as well. Of course, it means that just our general model of broadcast associated to Physio Matters and beyond, through Therapy Live and all the opportunities we've tried to share good ideas and challenge bad ones. Whether you see this opportunity that knocks there for what we should do either differently or continue to do into the new year. So I'm being a bit self-indulgent now and trying to get a bit of a feedback loop going, but where do you see this and other things that we've been doing, and how could they improve?
I'll jump in first if unless someone else wants to. I think that you guys were almost primed for this year. You've been challenging things and being inventive for a long time. We've chatted before, and I know one of the things you've mentioned, Jack, which is exactly what I think is the right plan, is next year should hopefully give you longer and more time to prepare some of the things that this year were successful and helpful for the industry based on ridiculously tight timescales. So I would almost say that rather than changing things or doing things differently, I'm excited to see what you do with the same formats in more time, with more preparation and more thought.
That's a good point, and thank you for that. That's a really decent thing for you to hold us to, because that's an easier one to do it. If we had to innovate under the same timescales as we did the last year, then that would put me in the ground, I think. So yeah, I'm excited to see especially the thoughtfulness we can apply to some of the similar principles now that we've got the foundations down. I think it'd be really cool, and I'm really looking forward to that too. So no, thanks, mate, and thanks for all you've been involved in supporting us with. Who's next?
Do you want to
go? I would say yes. Building what Mike just said, trust yourselves. You've coped with this year. Trust yourselves to cope with what comes next. I'm going to say an easier year. No, I'm not going to say that. We said that last year, didn't we? We're going to trust yourselves to cope with whatever will come. And I'm just going to, with my bias, just champion for a moment. More women, Jack. Need more women stepping up and appearing on these shows. It isn't that scary. Jack's pretty nice to you. Not just women, but the quiet, the thoughtful, the introverted people. Let's hear from you, because you are so often the ones with the absolute gold ideas. And I would love to hear more from the students and the young physios, because it's always so exciting to hear what's going on in their heads when they're not encumbered by all the boring things that the rest of us deal with.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and certainly, make that known. It's an open invite. We're really trying to encourage people to come along. We understand it can be a bit of a daunting thing, it being live, and hopefully I'm not too scary, but sometimes the format is, or maybe even I am. So if there's any ways in which we can make it more accessible, then let us know. But generally speaking, we want to air all good ideas, and that includes all personality types and dispositions. And so it's a really good point, Joe. Alistair, then you've had more time than most to think about that. What's your answer?
I require more time than most to think, honestly, Jackie. Yeah, too many rugby hits to the head, I think. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a class action lawsuit. So I think for me, you know, Jack, you've been somebody who sort of springboarded. I leached off you as a platform to be able to try and improve understanding and knowledge and education, and that has now started to grow on its own. But I think, I don't think from looking from my point of view, you don't necessarily need to change anything. I completely agree with the points both Mike and Joe have made around you've got an incredibly solid foundation as well as some of the best thinkers within physiotherapy at the moment. And I think, you guys will be innovating of things that I couldn't even foresee. And I think all of us have sat there and gone, oh, why did I think of that? But I think just the foundations that you've got and keep giving people an opportunity. And like Joe says, more women, more students, let's use the platform and establishment that you have got to give credence and credibility to people who may not have the confidence. And I'm somebody who I needed a good kick up the bum to come and speak out and ask to be on the podcast. And I would say, like Joe said, it's not scary as long as you've got your thesaurus tagged on, or you translate it for some of the big words that Jack used. I said today I'll come on if you don't use words more than 3 syllables long. But it's a really, really supportive environment, and I think you guys are continuing to innovate and will continue to do so, no doubt. So, like Mike says, keep building on what you've got, keep shining a light on people that are in shady places.
That's really onomatopoeia of you to say so.
It makes me feel photosynthesis.
Really appreciate it. No, that's really good, guys, and of course that's what we want to try and do. I think what's been interesting for me, and it's fascinating because I'll say I certainly won't go into details, but meetings that have preceded this one on my final day, at least in the office today, has meant that I've realised that there's some interesting shortcomings on my own work and my own leadership and my own management of relationships under duress of time pressure, etc., that this year has brought both personally and professionally, independent of the pandemic, as you know, with my home circumstances and new kids and trying to work out a new identity that comes with that, means that there's been errors that have been made in that space that need to be corrected for, as well as then trying to create a format of which things are sustainable, because that's important too. Is if we'll try and, as I mentioned, offer a loudhailer to my favorite people, favorite ideas, and try and make sure that we broadcast and give platform to the best and brightest in order to raise standards and do better work for our patients and with our patients and give voice to our patients, is that it's important for us to create systems and be the right people to do so. And so there's lots to reflect on, lots to learn, and lots of improvement, certainly for me and the team to go with. But I'm glad to hear and fascinating. I mean, in many ways, I could have done with one of these ideas to have fallen short, because it's given us more work. But because of you guys and others, it's kind of meant that we've got more opportunities to reach more people and to hopefully influence standards for the better. Thank you as ever for all your involvement. Really appreciate it. And please just do a quick lap telling people how they can find out a little bit more about you so they can make sure, if they don't already, to follow your work. Joe first.
Sorry, Jack, I didn't quite hear that. What did you want us to do?
Quickly, just tell folk where they can hear more about you if they don't already follow you along.
Okay, well, if you haven't already had enough of me on 3 chewing over sessions, it's very self-indulgent, then you can get more in the new year. I am starting a new podcast called You Matter, which will absolutely be a platform for the people I've just mentioned and everybody, the whole sphere. But don't be shy, I'll be nice to you too, and I don't know as many big words as Jack, so it'll be fine. You can also get me on LinkedIn and a little bit on Twitter now as well.
Nice one. Mike?
Yeah, you can find me probably 3 places. Clinically, find me as the Endurance Physio on all platforms. Business-wise, find me as Sports Injury Fix on all platforms. And if it's CPD and learning, find me at therapistlearning.com.
Fantastic. And Alistair?
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram as @the LD Physio, and also on LinkedIn at Alistair Beverley.
and more work to come from Alistair, of course, that we will be promoting loudly and proudly as he develops that brand and does this important work, as these three do, and Jane and the girls, Megan and Georgia, well done to them, and thank you for all their hard work as well, and all the other folk that couldn't quite join us just because of timing and the short time frame of which I invited them today, all our former guests that have been on this show, for making what was meant to be a bit of a plucky pilot kick on and work again. And so hopefully we can kick on again in the new year. So we'll be back on, what would it be, maybe the 4th or something like that, whatever's the first sort of working Monday of the new year. We'll be back, and as I promised you, the volume will be turned down on our little intros and outros, because that's been the core complaint that's been made, is it blares in your ears and lights up the room. So apologies for that, but tough luck. See you later, guys. Thanks.
Hey everyone, take care. Have a nice Christmas.
Bye. Merry Christmas.